Welcome back to the Talk Past podcast. Of course, I am the usual host, NC. I got other names I shouldn't be mentioning that I almost did. But I have, of course, great friend, actor, re-enactor, and member of You Go and Do Your Thing.
Hi, it is a pleasure to be back. Thank you for having me. Yes, my name is Caleb. I'm a member of FCFT, Full Combat Foot Tournament, or Full Contact Foot Tournament. My
Mhm.
apologies.
Either work.
I also have an Instagram account, Caleb's Cosplay, where I post all my my kit and my costumes and cosplays and all manner of outfits.
Indeed, dear friend, since 2010, in
Yeah.
the King Arthur years, back before it was still convoluted, but we had fun. Of course, we did an episode last month, September, regarding the role that you're playing, King Edmund
Mhm,
II, as it pertains to battling, or a scenario where he battled uh, King Canute. Basically,
mhm.
y'all both became kings, and obviously, leading up to this, you and I, in particular, have been in constant discussion regarding Kit, regarding what should he look like, what might he have, what can you have within reason, what are the limitations, and what can you bend on in terms of what's historical accuracy versus historically adequate. So I thought
Mhm.
it'd be interesting to have the dichotomy, the black and white between discussing King Edmund, the story, the actual individual, and then your interpretation in the show versus how we actually get our kits together for the festival we do. In particular, this one, since it's at least in my time doing SMF, probably the more historically accurate one that I've seen, and probably the only one I've ever actually been engaged in, including my own kit. So yes, let's discuss. So
Let's do it.
where shall we start? Obviously, I suppose with casting, um, negating that you knew about the casting, but going into actually starting to think about being King Edmund II is when you kind of
Yeah.
started messaging me. And what kind of thoughts did you have going into wanting the role as it pertains to what you think you might need or have for Kit?
Yeah, that's a very good topic to start on. So when this show was announced last year at the end of our show at Cast Party in December, last year's scenario was Scottish versus English,
Mhm.
William Wallace, all that, and they announced that they were going to do a Viking scenario. Oh, cool! Yeah,
Yeah,
we did Scottish. Let's bring in the Vikings because that's a big money maker as well.
yeah.
Um, I didn't really give it much thought at first. He said it was King Edmund Ironside versus King Canute the Great, and I was like, "Oh, those are some silly names." I never heard of of these characters before.
Right.
I've heard of Alfred the Great, Guthrum. I've heard of 1066 with William and Harold and all that, but 1016, never heard of it. So
Mhm.
I rested for the rest of the year. I took a month off of like any kind of medieval stuff. And then January rolls around, and I'm like, let me check out this scenario that they talked about. It was a silly name. Everyone made fun of it, as in Dune. Everyone called it Ass in Dune, and all that.
Mhm.
So I looked it up, and I started reading about it, and I was almost instantly hooked by the character of Edmund. How he was very young. I mean, and compared to like today's leaders, a 26-year-old being a king, that's crazy. Um, so I read more about him. I read more about Canute. I read about the
Mhm.
battle, why it went wrong, why it was a loss on Edmund's side, what happened to him afterwards, and I just, I was hooked. But I didn't want to obsess over it. I didn't want to make it a big deal, and I didn't want everyone to be or I didn't want to tell everybody, oh, I want to be Edmund. I want to be Edmund. I kept it cool. I kept it professional. And then around June of this year, I gave our director a call and I said, hey, man, I'm going to be straight up with you. I would like to play Edmund Ironside. He said, okay. I'm like, all right, thanks for listening. And I hung up. And that's all. That's what I did. But so as fair started to get closer, let's see, I called him in June, July, August. So right about the end of July is when I really started to be like, excuse me, I really need to start getting kit in order. In preparation for the possibility of being Edmund, but also in case I wasn't. I wanted to get kit that was interchangeable. I could use it as a king. I could use it as a peasant. And so the first thing, obviously, I started with was shoes. Because I always start from the ground up. You always want to start from the ground up because you're going to be on your feet the whole time and you want to be used to the shoes that you're going to be wearing for the show. Right. So I'll tell you this right now. Etsy has been my go-to this whole year, probably more than any other fair years I've done. Etsy has been super helpful in finding a ton of surprisingly accurate stuff. And I can get into that as we get closer to like jewelry and detail work and all that. But I did find these shoes on Etsy, and they're turn shoes. Now, turn shoes, you're like, what is that? What are turn shoes? You know what turn shoes are, but our audience doesn't. Turn shoes are a very simple design of shoe. It's 3 leather panels, the sole, one side and the other side. You sew them up, and you push the shoe right side in so that the seams are now inside the shoe, away from any wear and tear. It's more water repellent. They're really simple, and they're really effective. They have been found in almost every burial site for both Saxons and Danes and Norwegians. And even throughout early medieval into high medieval, like turn shoes were just a really effective shoe. They were simple, easy to make. So I got a pair of turn shoes that were very nice. They weren't super fancy, but they had a very clean, sleek design to them. I think, in fact, they were found. It was a design found at Hedeby, or spelled in Norwegian like Hedeby. Yeah. So I got those first. It took about 3 weeks for them to be handmade and sent over here. So I got them around mid-August, and I've been wearing them ever since. They're super durable, super strong. Mm-hmm. They're comfortable. It's almost like wearing slippers. They're just really nice shoes.
Oh yeah.
So that was the first.
Obviously, I've never worn them. I've always had the Son of Sandlers or the Minnetonkas, but I do recall when you started actually wearing them, and this is sort of a discussion and maybe a guide for other reenactors, either in our group or out there that might be interested in turn shoes. But you mentioned having an issue with water, because obviously our show is in Florida. Florida is, I mean, no joke on the hurricane, but it's kind of like raining every day. So it's kind of underwater every single day. At some point in the day, covered in water. And so it's a lot different than Scotland, Scandinavia, and Ireland and England. How did you end up getting them water resistant? Because I remember, obviously, historically, they would use like wax and
yes,
et cetera. But it's also a completely different region than tropical, damp Florida. And I know today we have actual waterproof spray that literally is like magic. But how did you end up, if you'd ended up being able to protect your shoes?
Yeah, so that was a big issue. When I first started wearing them, I was breaking them in. But August was a very wet month. Mm-hmm. And the site out there was pretty wet every weekend. And so my shoes, they were resistant up to a point. So if it was raining and you didn't step in any puddles, your feet were relatively dry because it wouldn't get through the seams at the top. But as soon as you stepped into a puddle, it would seep through the seam at the sole, and it would just soak your feet.
Yeah, because I
I
mean,
tried.
sorry, because that's how you use leather. You get it wet so you can.
Right.
But continue. Sorry.
No, it's okay. So I tried natural beeswax. I tried a waterproofing spray, like the magic spray that you said.
Mhm.
But I will be honest, it didn't work. My
Mhm.
feet would get wet if I stepped in any puddles. And so I was pretty upset about that for a bit. But then I went back and I read one of the articles that you sent to me when I was researching this. And I noticed that there's a paragraph in there. The reenactor, the historical reenactor who tried on all this kit, and he made a note of these shoes. He said, I noticed that as we were walking through the snow, that my feet got wet and cold very, very fast. And we had to sit by the fire for about half an hour before they dried up, and I was able to walk again. So honestly, there was really nothing that they could have done more than natural wax. They just got wet. I mean, it is
Mhm.
what it is. Leather is a skin, and it's porous. So you can cure it, you can harden it, you can do as much as you can to it, but eventually your feet will get soaked through. So I
Right.
felt better about that. I wasn't doing anything wrong. It was just the nature of the shoe. And a lot of people asked me why I didn't just use my sandlars. I said because I really wanted to do this year, especially more than any other years that I've done. I wanted to be as accurate as I could this year because I felt, what's the word? I felt like I needed to show respect to the character and for this scenario in general.
Mhm.
I didn't want to just use sandlers and wrap the tops of them to make it look like I'm wearing ankle shoes, because that would look kind of cheap, in my opinion.
And Sandlers are obviously beautiful. I love them, and I will always use them. But they
They are
they look
amazing shoes.
they look nothing like anything they would have worn back then. Even if
Right,
you get brown Sandlers, which is much more appropriate than black, but
right.
they still got the little traction. It's still et cetera,
They've
et
got the
cetera.
half-inch rubber soles. They've got
Mhm.
the really aggressive lacing up the all up the
Yeah,
leg. They're beautiful shoes, absolutely. And I've had mine. Mine were actually used, and they're I think they're about 10 years old, and they are still kicking. Like they're great
same,
shoes.
same.
Um,
Although, did so obviously, yes, there's very rarely going to be an ability for us to appropriately keep leather shoes, even sandals, from ultimately getting wet or soaking in. So, would you think that a possible solution for reenactors might be something inside the shoe, like an insert?
I had thought about that, and I was actually very close to doing that. To lining the inside with some sort of rubber lining or plastic lining, and kind of like heat treating it so it like
Hmm.
bonds to the inside of the shoe. Um, so that's a possibility. I haven't tried it myself. I didn't have time. And I just kind of got used to it.
Yeah.
I've been changing out my socks if there's any puddle, and my feet have stayed dry for the most part. And it
Honestly,
actually leads
honestly.
into
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
no,
Are you leading
continue.
into a new topic? Okay. What I was gonna say is also, I mean, um, turn shoes are much smaller than sandals. Now, again,
Mm,
I
hmm.
love sandals. I love sandals. I actually donned my kit, and we'll discuss that later uh, during the weekend. But it takes forever to get those on and off. So
Yeah.
if you've got turn shoes, or we'll just say historically accurate shoes, it's a
Hmm.
lot easier to mediate those issues because you can just slip them right off, change your socks if you need to, just bring more socks. Um, or
It's so fast. Like I
it's
can
so
just slip
easier.
these shoes on and lace it up, and it's surprise. It amazes me how fast I can put these on and off. Like with the sandlars, I have to lace them all the way up. I have to make sure they're nice and tight. And if there is an issue on the bottom of my foot that I missed, I gotta unlace it and take them back off and slide them off my leg. But with
Yeah.
these, I just pop them on and off.
Yeah, for me, it's still. I mean, I got my sandals from Carl, and he's still an influence on me, despite he doesn't do the show
Yeah.
anymore. But I am so grateful for those sandals, and they're still in great condition. But I use sewing utensils to get the laces on and off. So, like, I'm excited now that I actually have awakened to wanting and having an interest in actual historical garb rather than my weird blind gothic leathers that you would see in like a club that I've been
Yeah.
wearing. And just the prospect of having shoes you can just take on and off casually is just
Yeah.
so enticing. And you were transitioning into something, so go ahead.
Sweet. All right. So let's see. The turn shoes, great, a great piece of kit. We move up to a combination of socks and winingas, or leg
Mhm.
wraps, or puttees, as they were called in World War One.
Not to be
I
confused with poutine or
Poutine, right, right. You
poutine.
don't
Yeah,
wear gravy and fries on your legs.
no.
Um, so the socks and the winingas are kind of go hand in hand. I am wearing wool socks and wool winingas. The winingas are about 12 feet long. They go up my leg. They actually go over my pants as well, and I'll talk about the pants in a minute. So basically, I would put on my socks, put on my pants, put on the winingas, then put on the shoes. So the socks, very comfortable. They're wool. They're actually pretty good at wicking water away. So if I step in a little puddle, the sock will absorb it, and my feet aren't actually physically wet. And the winingas are great too because I wrap those over the socks. So I will take the end of the wininga, I will put it over my foot and kind of tuck it under my arch, and then I will wrap it once more over and under, and then around my ankle, and then continuously go up, 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 all the way up to the smaller part of the calf. So right behind my knee, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, they're comfortable. They kind of act as compression socks. If I put them on tight enough, not enough to cut off circulation, but enough that I feel like nice and compressed, they're
Mhm.
very comfortable. They support my ankle. So everything that I know I don't have with the Son of Sandlars, like the Sandlars are ankle supporting. They go all the way up your leg. They are very tight. Basically, the winingas are kind of acting as the rest of the shoe, you know,
Yeah. Although
that
I
we're
got a
used to.
couple questions then on the Winingas, and we'll discuss our actual discussion leading into all of this, of course, too, because
Yep.
it's about how we acquired all of this. Um, so what is? I know you've showed pictures, but my memory. What are the colors of your Winingas? The material, and did you get a fancy pin, or is it just kind of a regular pin? Basically, are you using the pin as decor as a king?
Yes. So right now, my winingas are a tan and brown color. So this goes back to my not wanting to presume that I was going to be the king, but
Mhm.
also not wanting something peasant looking. And the tan and brown actually hide dirt very well. So from a militaristic standpoint, the tan winingas are very good winingas because the color blends in. It's a nice light, creamy tan and brown. And I could see someone who's been on the battlefield, whether they're a king or not, wear them. But I actually did just order a new pair of navy midnight blue winingas because
Ah,
Edmund's colors are burgundy and midnight blue. And I'll get
where
into
did
more about why.
where did you order them from?
I ordered them from Etsy, from Avalon Natural
Uh,
on Etsy.
let
They're
me
based in Georgia, so they come very fast.
let me write that down so we can give people those
Yeah.
references. Um, I've got same color as well. I don't know if it's the same color, but I've got navy blue, a very, very deep, almost midnight blue wool herringbone pattern Winingas. Let me let my cat out after bringing them in so they don't go out. So I'd be interested in seeing what yours are. But pin, do you have like did you get a specific pin for you, your character, or are you just kind of using any sort of pin? It's not something that you're sort of focusing on.
I got the pin after I was cast,
Mm-hmm.
so that way I was assured that, like, oh, okay, so I can get this pin. They are two small penannular brooches with curled ends. I poke them, so I wrap up the Wininga and I lay it flat against my thigh or against my calf on the side, and I poke the pin through one layer or through two layers. I push down and then I poke it back through, and then I twist the penannular brooch so that it locks behind the curled end of the brooch. It's secured. It's fancy. There's evidence that they used penannular brooches to clasp their Winingas. Otherwise,
Mm-hmm.
you would just kind of wrap it over and under to act as as kind of like a Velcro. But I
Yeah.
didn't want to do that. I wanted to have a nice flash of bronze and brass.
Yeah, and I think we
Yeah,
won't get into the history, of course. This is more just kit. But I believe there
yeah.
are like a variety of different ways that individuals back then fastened their Winingas. At some point,
Hmm.
I'll do a podcast episode specifically on Winingas because they're interesting too. As I'm building my kit, my specific Viking reenactment character for the channel, I likewise I haven't gotten shoes, but I've started specifically with the Winingas and then the
Yeah.
pillbox cap that is on the channel that I'll have to redo. But anywho, um, so obviously we're kind of going up the leg here, but in regards to leading into all of this in our discussions prior to, and something that I want to sort of convey in this episode to other reenactors not in our show as well as in our show, is sort of the mental process of going into how we're gathering this and the research. Um, I think prior to actually, and maybe a little into casting of Edmund, when we were discussing, I kind of blurred the lines of Viking, or we'll say Scandinavian or Dane in this sense, versus Saxon. Because I know, I mean, at this point, the Danes are they've been there for hundreds of years. You know, they're as much England as Edmund is, and
Right.
so I know there might be a bit of minutia or nuance to the difference between something Edmund might wear versus Canute, but I think as a reenactor and reenactment, what's your opinion of sort of letting those lines kind of be blended if we might not have a full, accurate vision of what they would have worn? As if there was a difference between, well, sure, Canute would wear full on herringbone or other patterned wool twill Winingas with very specific Scandinavian uh, uh, pin, or maybe not. And maybe Edmund being Saxon, also being king or in the line for, or even maybe not, maybe he didn't care because he was always fighting. Maybe he just was more practical. What was your thought process going into sort of that dichotomy of, because Winingas are kind of brought up more so for Vikings than Saxon,
Yes.
but they did wear them. I mean, the statue of King Alfred has Winingas.
Yeah. No, that's a good question. It kind of goes back to I didn't know about casting yet, and I wanted to kind of keep it a little bit neutral. That way, if I wasn't cast, I could still use the same outfit that I had, just with different, a little different colors and whatnot. But Winingas are, yes, the Saxons use the Danes use them, the Scandinavians use them more. And I was actually torn after I was cast as Edmund. I was torn, thinking that, oh man, the Saxons often wore leggings with cross gartering, so they could use either linen strips or leather strips of cross gartering. So basically,
Yeah.
you would wrap it around your foot and make an X, wrap it over, make an X again, and then probably one more. That's a
Yeah.
very Anglo-Saxon look. And even now, I'm still debating on whether or not to make one or make a pair and wear that around the site.
Right. Even though I'm being ignorant here, so my apologies to those that may know. And if you do, let me know in the comments. But just taking a look at King Alfred's statue, which is at the moment my only point of reference for a Saxon wearing Meningas, I don't know when this was constructed and if it was even accurate to the time, but I mean, he's wearing exactly what you described. Um, literally, well, I mean, he's also not wearing any pants, but but yeah, no, it looks exactly like that. Like we've got our Meningas. Although his on the statue look a little bit more drapey, but he's got
Mhm,
he's got the tie. He's got what looks like winning is poking out of the fabric, and
mhm.
I feel like maybe Edmund, Alfred, Ethelfled, etc. Uh, the Unready, King Ethelred the Unready, etc., etc. It might have a little bit more decor, or something a little bit more than maybe Canute. But that's
Mhm.
also up to interpretation as reenactors. So I saw you were kind of getting vague or wanting something more vague until we actually knew. So
Right.
I know I kind of steered a little bit closer to Viking, or
Mhm.
maybe even vague Viking, because I mean at this point we're getting a lot of shared culture, a lot of shared clothing and weaponry. I mean,
Yeah.
I think during Alfred's time, that was one of the first things that happened. The Vikings didn't have as good a weapon as the Saxons, so the Viking traders, the ones that are actually there to settle and trade, got Saxon weaponry,
Yeah.
goes to the Vikings, and then that's why the Vikings started doing better. So over time, over what 200 years this is, they're going to start integrating.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, are you doing the cross or just the plain Winingas with a decored pin?
Well, I don't know yet. I have the material ready to go. I could make cross garter like leather strips for cross gartering within a night, and I could wear them. But my thought process behind why I was picking these colors and these the Winningas instead of just leggings. Edmund is a very military man, more so than Canute. Edmund has been fighting since the age of 12. He's been in this war for 14 years. He's seen a lot. He knows what works for him. He knows what is effective on the battlefield, and we'll get into that. Um, my kit and why I wear it.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, he knows what's effective. He knows Winningas are gonna keep him warm and dry and safe. I mean, obviously they didn't have plate armor was not a big thing, so they didn't have a lot of ways to protect their extremities. But Winningas and cross gartering was just a little bit of it protected from brambles. It protected from grazing blows. Um, if your wingers were on tight enough, you could almost use them as a tourniquet. They could stop the bleeding by pulling off your wraps and cinching it around a sliced limb. Um, so that was my thought process. I wanted Edmund to show that he was very militaristic. Everything about his kit was there for a reason. And while he may not be as colorful as Canute, he still has some semblance of you know uh, kingliness and affluent richness. So
Mhm.
and that's why I purchased the navy blue ones, because I was like, man, the tan ones have been working well for me, but I really want to show that Edmund has more money. He's a king. He has access to colors. Um,
Precisely. Not only that,
so
but all the interpretations I see of Edmund that actually show a body and color contain a lot of blue in it.
yes,
A lot of very specific color choice.
yes. Well, I can touch on a few more parts of the kit. So like my pants are probably the least accurate on my kit just because I had them available. They're kind of baggy. I can cinch them at the ankle, and when I wrap up the Winingas, they form a nice bellowed pant leg. Not super big, like a Kievan Roos kind of pants. You know, it's not 7 pleated. It's not yards of fabric for my pants. But they've got a reinforced knee. So for our actual physical fighting that we do, I am not worried about them ripping or getting snagged or anything. So my pants are comfortable. I wear 2 layers of tunics. I do wear an under tunic that comes to about mid thigh. It's a tan color. And then I wear a burgundy red over tunic, and that comes right down to my knee.
As it should.
It was made, as it should. It was made by my loving fiance. She did such a great job on it. The sleeves aren't too baggy, but they do hang about an inch off of my wrist, so there's room to move and to flex and strike and all that. It has this beautiful bell to it. So when I'm wearing everything on top of it, it actually forms a bell around my legs, and it's so flowy, and it's one of my favorite pieces of costuming I've had, period. It's awesome. And then that's what I wear when I'm not in armor. I also wear a woven belt, a light blue and yellow tablet woven belt that was actually found in Dublin during the Vikings' rule there. I know a lot of people would say, oh, why would you wear something from Dublin when the Vikings ruled as an Anglo-Saxon king? Well, I don't think it's out of the ordinary for a Saxon to reach out and get other designs from cultures. Obviously, the Saxons weren't known for their traveling, but I don't think they would have been ignorant to designs of the world. You know, they obviously, the Danes had traders and they bought Saxon weapons, so I'm sure Saxons bought stuff from them.
Well, yeah, you're always also hearing about Saxons that are able to pilgrimage to Rome, and traveling all over the world. I mean, people today think of them as as medieval people, as very nationalistic. Like you're only, like here in America, like it's only made in America, or so. But technically, even today, we get our stuff from all over the world. They would have as well then, whenever and wherever they could get it.
And the reason I picked that belt specifically was because it had a dragon head motif on it. And so the dragon is a reoccurring theme in Edmund's outfit. The Saxons had dragon imagery. The Saxons' art and styles were very interesting. They had like flowing Celtic knots still. They still had that from their early days as the with the Celts and the Picts and all that. They have very geometric shapes, very hard angles, and they loved their beasts. They loved creatures in all of their art. One specific style of art is called Trewhiddle. Trewhiddle, Trewhiddle, and it's just a conglomerate of flowing lines, very fine detail work. It's really interesting to see. So I got that tablet woven belt, and I also got a leather belt, also from Etsy. Most everything is from Etsy. The tablet woven belt was from Fenrir and then capital S on Etsy, and that came all the way from Poland, so that was really nice. Oof. And then the leather belt I have is from, where is it from? Okay, bear with me 1 second. Mm-hmm. I got a big order list. The leather belt came from Hamster Hall in Kiev, Ukraine. Obviously, this shop was, bit busy. They had to make sure they were safe. So I did not want to pressure them. I did not want to pester them. I ordered it and I just let them do their thing. And it got here relatively fast. I was very appreciative of them. And it also has a dragon on it. It has a belt strap end. So it weighs it down. It's cast in bronze. That's another reoccurring theme. A lot of people would ask me, hey, why aren't you wearing silver? Silver is like the currency, and it's very very expensive. Well, first of all, my skin tone doesn't make silver look good. Like silver doesn't look good on me.
Mhm.
Second of all, bronze is more of a bronze and gold. I feel like are more. Bronze was still a precious metal. It was still hard to acquire. Um, So I don't think it's out of the ordinary for Edmund to wear bronze and gold instead of silver. So bronze is my main jewelry color, main metal accent. Um, I've got that. I have a ring, a twisted bronze ring. I'm wearing the Galloway cross as my cross pendant on my chest. It depicts the four saints, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and it is also in the tray whittle design. I have a brooch, a cloak brooch, that is also tray whittle, that was actually found in Pitney. It is a replica of an 11th century brooch, Anglo-Saxon brooch.
All right.
Um,
So that brings up a real quick side discussion for reenactors listening, both in our show and others. So there's a bit of a debate within the community
mhm,
regarding some people believe that quote unquote being historically accurate is more like you're just copying the outfit of a dead person, right? Like the Vikings kind of decorated their dead, so we may not know 100% exactly how they dressed on a day-to-day basis. Um,
mhm,
I'm not 100% on the Saxons, but so there's some people who believe that, and I'm kind of in the middle. I really don't care. Who believe it might be more interesting to allow a more historically adequate concept where you take what's available in our knowledge of whatever historical period you're cosplaying or reenacting or acting, if it's an actual professional thing, um, and not necessarily basing it on, say, the burial of a dead person. So,
mhm,
um, I personally love the idea of integrating both actual known artifacts like
mhm,
yourself here, but also kind of coming up with my own creative concept that is historically adequate, at least as it
mhm.
pertains to, say, um, design. I've got books on designs that the Vikings used, Saxons used, etc. Um, stitching. Some people like to use exact stitching on exact artifact finds. Um, Shout out to the Welsh Viking is my reference there. Um,
Yeah.
some people don't care. You're just making a shirt as long as it's historically adequate, as long as it's relevant, right? So where do you sort of fall? Because I know in our discussions leading up to all of this, we really did very heavily discuss actual artifacts, actual things that exist that you can base off, but also did delve, perhaps maybe as more nuance, things that are more adequate. But where would you fall in that sort of argument?
Um, well, since this is the first year that I've really delved into it, outside of like a Joan of Arc scenario where I have to focus on plate armor and 14th century nonsense and all that, um, I really didn't want to stray too far away from the hard metals. Like I didn't want to stray too far from what is actually found in burial sites.
Yeah.
But just like with textiles. There was a lot of freedom with my pants, with my shirts. I obviously we don't do accurate stitching. My fiance has a sewing machine, and it has a couple settings on it, and that's what we use to sew our fabrics. Um, she did make the keyhole design. She did make the neckline plunge down, go over, and then come back up. Obviously, not exposing the neck because that was immodest, but it has that shape to it. So we did follow that, but I really didn't want to pull something from, say, the 12th century, like as far as jewelry goes, and say, "Oh, look, I'm wearing something from early 11th century, because I know there will be people out there who really get irritated by that. I'll be honest, I'm one of them. So I owed it to myself and to the character to try to be as accurate to what's been found in burial sites. So, like with the Galloway cross, I was looking for Anglo-Saxon crosses because Edmund would have worn a cross, or he would have had a cross available to pray to, and to show his faith. And a lot of them that I was finding were very garish. Like Anglo-Saxons, they put a bunch of gold and a bunch of jewelry or jewels on everything, and none of them really stood out to me. But then I read up about tree whittle design, and I was looking for a cross that had tree whittle design, and the Galloway cross came up, and I'm like, oh my goodness, it's got the flowing designs, it's got the four saints. This is perfect. And then I actually found a brooch based on that after that. So it kind of flowed together, not because I was seeking out, specific historical artifacts. It just so happened that they were they were replicas of historical artifacts, but only because I was looking for a specific art design. So I wanted a tree whittle design. I found a cross, and then I found a brooch with the same design. I fall into the do the best you can. If you have to, because I'm not wearing a wood core scabbard for my sword. I can't, because we're fighting in a 40-person melee, and I can't hit the ground with a wood core scabbard and not have it break. So I'm using a soft scabbard, a leather sheath, basically, and so I know that that's not accurate because they would have protected their swords with wood, but I have limitations in the show that I do.
Yeah, and that's a
same.
sort of a little digress is the concept of reenactorism, which
Yeah.
is regarding things that we reenactors do to sort of, I don't want to say cut corners, but definitely sort of save us time on certain things, or pain on certain things, such as how you handle the shirt, or wearing insoles and stuff like that. So obviously we do a show in Florida, so wearing linen undergarments and a wool tunic and
Mm.
chainmail and whatever is probably not exactly practical. But
Most people on cast are not wearing 2 layers. I'm actually one of the few people who is wearing 2 layers, but I've found that I'm very comfortable in it because they're both linen. I'm not wearing any wool or silks or anything. That's another liberty I'm taking. A lot of people would ask, why aren't you wearing fancier cloth and textiles for Edmund? Because I don't have the money for that. I can't make a full silk shirt or tunic and not and risk it breaking or ripping and then having to make a new one. I'm wearing linen. I'm wearing 100% linen, at least, but I am wearing linen, and it's comfortable, and I can wash it and hang dry it, and it comes out just fine. But on your topic of reenactorism, there is a note. I've kind of gone all over the place. I apologize,
no
but
worries.
on the topic of armor. So my helmet, I wanted to wear a nasal helmet right from the get-go. I knew I wanted to wear a nasal helm. Even though there is examples of, say, the Soot and Who helmet, or the one found at Staffordshire, the Staffordshire Horde. There are examples of Anglo-Saxon helmets, but they are all very early medieval, like 6th, 7th, 8th century helmets.
Not only that, but they are very specific. So you don't
Yes.
know, you as in us reenactors, don't know if those helms were sort of made to order, like you
Right.
might get some Nikes today, or if that is something legitimately custom made for the individual that was wearing it.
Right. So I didn't want a full-faced helmet like that, and I didn't want that intricate of a helmet, because I know that it's going to get rusty and it's going to get beaten up. But I knew I wanted a nasal helmet because I love nasal helms. So the first helmet I got, I liked it. It was cool. it had little ridges on the brow. And then I later found out that it was a Saint Wenceslas style
Mhm.
helmet, and that was an 11th century helmet, but it was after the Normans had already invaded, so 50 years after this scenario. And so I thought about it. I'm like, is this one of the reenactorisms that I'm willing to let go, or should I fix it? And I decided to fix it. I decided to get another nasal helm that's just as strong, from Grimfrost, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And it's I didn't want a, what's the word? What do they call it? A Spangen helm. Spangen helms are helmets made from multiple pieces of metal riveted together. It's much cheaper to make, mass produced, but it's much weaker. And obviously, it's cheaper to make. So why would a king have a cheap helmet? I wanted to get a one piece helmet, which would have, at the time, would have been very expensive to produce because you have to draw the nasal from a single piece of metal without it breaking. And I found just the right helmet for that. So one of the reenactorisms that I had on my person, I wanted to change because I felt more comfortable having a different helmet than the one that, it's 50 years later. It's not that big of a time difference. But if other people were readily recognized it, I knew I wanted to change it to something a bit more accurate for the time period. And it looks great too. It fits with my kit 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So then, of course, we're the show's in Florida. What
Mhm.
are you presumably wearing? Mostly linen, whereas I'm sure a lot of people on cast are wearing cotton.
Right. So I'm wearing wool socks, wool Waningas, and then linen pants and tunics. I am wearing a cotton. So I am wearing mail, chain mail to the layman. Um, and I didn't want to put the chain mail directly on my nice burgundy tunic, And you and I have talked about this.
Hmm.
Did gambesons exist? And you told me, I said, hey, NC, would gambesons have existed? And you said the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So if gambesons existed before this time period and gambesons existed after this time period, we can only assume that the Danes, the Saxons, they all had a way to pad out their mail because mail was the primary source of protection outside of a helmet and a shield. Um,
Right.
and you don't want that right up against your thin shirt, So I had one of our cast members make me a custom tunic, and it comes right, I think, right above, right at my waist, right above my waist. Um, and I can lace it up. I can put the male shirt over it. It's short sleeves, so it doesn't poke out from underneath the male shirt. And that's one of the I guess you could call it reenactorism, but I don't really see it as that because they must have worn gambesons. Like it's
It
90% surety that they did.
it's entirely plausible. I know this is that's again another one of the debates in terms of historical accuracy versus adequacy. Um,
Yeah.
is granted, yes, we have zero evidence of uh, gambesons as we know them being
Right.
used by specifically the Vikings.
This
But
is less of a
perhaps
gambeson and more of a padded shirt, honestly.
right,
Yeah.
and Sax at the time, and even referencing the Bayeux Tapestry, however you want to pronounce it.
Yeah.
Let's go to the Bayou. Um, but yet there's also an equal number of people pointing to the Bayeux Tapestry, saying the possibility or the fact that yes, gambesons did exist at this time, in some incarnation in some locations. So it's up to interpretation. It's kind of like, did
Mhm.
Tyrannosaurus have feathers? There's no evidence, but there's blah blah blah. It's kind of like, so it's sort of like, you know what, you be you. I think that's that's up to the individual.
Yeah.
I don't know. Me personally, I tend to lean more toward not wanting to say something unless it is legitimately, factually, historically proven.
Yeah.
But if there is a legitimate, complete historical, like, probability, plausibility, or even a minutia or nuance of evidence. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know what y'all listening, other reenactors or people that are just listening in general, kind of where on that line you fall, but uh, I don't know. Like for me as a reenactor, um, when I've worn chainmail, and I try to wear chainmail as few and far between as possible, because I've got that horrible, heavy, and also inaccurate butted mail, which I need to mail to blue. No pun intended. But I I never used a gambeson because I've got Bruce's old quote unquote gambeson, which is literally just the collar and the sleeves are a gambeson, and then the rest is just linen.
Right.
So
That's a
I've
that's a
never,
common trick that
yeah,
we in SMF like to pull off to give the illusion that we're wearing, a padded gambeson or padded arming shirt underneath, when in reality it's just those ends. And it's a good way to
yeah,
save money, and it's a good way to get a look across. So I'm not
yeah,
knocking it at all.
yeah. But me personally, I think I would much prefer wearing padded armor because obviously
Yeah.
this is a whole other discussion. But it's arguably probably better than chainmail as an armor. But
Oh,
not getting into
that's
the, oh, go ahead.
that's a good topic because so my male I'm technically only wearing two, I guess three if you don't count or if you count the or four if you count the padded shirt, and only three if you don't. So my helmet, my mail, and my shield are literally the only armor pieces I'm wearing. But and I wanted to get the mail shirt right as well. That was one thing that I bought early on too. Um, it's a riveted 16 gauge steel mail shirt, and it comes right below my groin, and the sleeves end right past my elbow, and it's very comfortable. It's lightweight. I know it's not going to break, and I didn't want to wear butted, obviously. I wanted to wear riveted, and I was able to find it for cheap from what's the site? It was also from Etsy, surprisingly. Um, from New Shop USA. So it's kind of a overseas shop. Clearly, you can see that in the title, but it was a 9 millimeter flat riveted hauberk, um, and so in combination with my padded shirt and my helmet, I'm pretty well protected. And we can get into how effective this kit was when I'm done talking about everything. I'm almost done,
Hmm.
I promise.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I've got my mail shirt, I've got the gambeson, an arming cap, a nasal helm. I'm not wearing anything on my arms, on my forearms. I'm not wearing any van braces or bracers. I was originally, and then I took them off because one, they were impeding on my arm movements, and two, they just aren't accurate. Arm guards weren't really a thing until um, plate armor came out, and I mean, they boiled leather, and they used like the Mongols boiled leather.
Hmm.
Everyone has used boiled leather as armor at some point, but specifically in this time period, there's no evidence for arm guards for van braces. So I took them off, and now I have much more freedom of movement in my wrists. Um, I'm not wearing gloves. I know a lot of people in SMF and in other reenactments get squeamish at the thought of not wearing gloves. Um, but one, they would have just worn, I guess, mittens
Yeah, or
or
fingerless gloves.
fingerless gloves. Yeah, and I just
Basically.
didn't. That look didn't sit right with me. I want to keep my hands free and open. And if you choreograph your moves right, there's no chance of you getting hurt. And if you do, it's my choice. It's my decision. I'm not worried about it. I've fought with no gloves before, and I can do it again.
Mhm.
But that pretty much completes my armor look. I also wanted to mention that I'm wearing a circlet as my crown. I'm also wearing a cloak, midnight blue cloak. So when I'm out in the lanes, I'm not wearing my armor. I have a burgundy gambeson and a midnight blue cloak. So red and blue. Um, well, before I delve into that topic, do we want to continue on how effective the armor was, or do we want to talk about the
Oh,
colors and the reasons why I'm wearing them?
well, we've kind of heavy hit some armor, so let's discuss that because obviously at this point, you guys, despite the one weekend issue with the hurricane, which technically every year we have one weekend we actually do miss. But
Right.
you've been choreographing the fight with Jake, and so now you
Yes.
know at this point the flow of your kit and how it's going, especially with Jake, who's a heavy hitter, a fast
Mhm.
fighter. So he's gonna put your kit to task.
Yeah. No, we're both wearing. He's also wearing a male hauberk, and he's also wearing a nasal helm. His nasal helm has an aventail, which is a male skirt on the back of the helmet that protects your neck. I am not. I wanted to have my neck free and open because I've had issues with overheating in the past, and I
Yeah,
didn't want anything blocking it. But in the beginning of the fight, we both have the same kit. We have male shirt, nasal helms, shields, and swords. And the way we've been able to utilize this armor, I kind of see like in the fair in this show specifically, it's kind of like Chekhov's gun. If you're wearing it, it needs to be used. I
hmm
I don't like it when people wear something like armor wise and they don't get hit on it to show that it's protective. So I actually give Jake quite a few hits to the head, and I drop down and I slice my sword across his mailed belly to
yeah,
show that I'm getting these hits in, but he's wearing armor just like me. So he's I mean he's getting hurt. Obviously, blunt trauma was a thing, but he's not getting sliced in half. And I'm really proud of that because it allows the audience to show that mail wasn't just an accessory. Mail was protective. In fact, in later centuries, a proper male coat, hauberk, and a good gambeson, and a tough linen shirt was enough to stop even arrows from puncturing. Like especially broadhead arrows, it was tough to get through that. I mean, you would have to have the heaviest of spear thrusts to puncture through these tightly woven rings. Like they weren't slouches with mail. I know a lot of people are like, oh, they wore butted mail. Yeah, in ceremonial positions.
riding
But
a
on the
horse.
battlefield, riding a horse, right? But on the battlefield, they had very tough, sturdy, riveted metal rings, and it was very tough to pierce through it. And these weapons in the Viking Age were meant for more slashing instead of stabbing because they had very broad tips. So forget about stabbing through this mail. Your only hope is to hack and slash through it. So that's what Edmund is trying to achieve. He's trying to cut through Canute's armor, Canute's mail, and moving in it is just fantastic. I mean, I have freedom in my arms. My torso doesn't get wound up. I can duck. I even roll a couple times, and I get back up with no hindrance at all. I mean, I've worn mail before last year, and it was easy to move in, but that was a 13th century, late 13th century scenario, and I was wearing more plate as well. So I was a bit more restrictive in my movements. But this year, I mean, it shows how it's called what is it? Experimental archaeology,
Yeah,
um, where they didn't have any fight manuals, they didn't have any technique scripts or any of that. You kind of have to work backwards in history to find out, how do these body mechanics work? How do these weapons work in the hand? And I can say now that they were very fast, aggressive fighters. Like everybody was a fast and aggressive fighter, even more so than someone in plate armor, because they had all this freedom of movement. They had to strike hard and fast with their swords to be able to cleave through mail. Um, there's even records of like there's skeletons found in graves with helmets, and that helmet has a split right down the middle. So that means that someone took a Dane axe and swung straight down with so much force it split a helmet open and into the skull. So these people were very, very strong, very, very skilled, talented fighters. They just probably weren't, they probably didn't have disarming techniques that we have or that later centuries would have.
They didn't have
So
the cornucopia of fecht books that we have now that didn't even
right,
come around until the medieval period was pretty much long gone.
right, yeah. So this kit is fantastic. It's so comfortable to wear, and I love using it. It's effective. I mean, you can take hits in it all day long, and you would start to feel bruising and broken ribs and
Yeah.
stuff. But he even uses a bardiche against me, and that would be a bit more of a threat than a sword, because that's a cleaving weapon that can go through me like butter. So I have to utilize more dodges, more evades, more blocks with my shield.
Mhm.
Um, and when I say blocks with the shield, a lot of people are probably imagining blocking, with the flat of the shield, like you would think. Round shields, they're actually more effective when you block with the edge, when you use a punching motion. When you punch forward with the rim of the shield and you stop something in its tracks, and then you have all this freedom, this openness in front of you to slice through. Um, Heater shields, which are the um, triangular shields that people think of when they think of knights. Heater shields were more of a wall, a defensive wall
Yeah.
that you turtle behind and you throw pokes at. Round shields are just as much of a weapon as your sword is. In fact, almost more so. I often find myself leading with my shield instead of my sword, because if I punch forward with a shield, any attack from above or to the side is negated, and I'm able to effectively use it like an umbrella to stop any sword strikes from coming at me. And I can just I punch forward with my shield, I slice with my sword, I repeat. It's a big it's a not a big it's a very effective flow of movement, and I
And
find myself enjoying it.
uh, that's also sort of the point of the round shields that I've started to discover the more I get into them, is that they were
Yeah.
meant to catch the weapon. That is the whole
Yes.
point. At least on the
Yes.
Viking side, because that's obviously the bulk of my research. But it is meant to catch the weapon. Sometimes even meant to literally. The whole point is just catch the weapon and destroy the shield, because you want to disarm your opponent. So
Yeah.
you
They would actually go on to the battlefield with 3 or 4 shields. And in fact, if your shield
know,
broke,
leading
you would just your
in
shield
another.
yeah, your shield broke, you would just run back, grab a new one, and run forward. They weren't meant
You,
to be like things that you would use over and over. They were meant to be destroyed, but the
yeah,
whole point was to catch enemy weapons in them. Um, Speaking of my shield, it is a wooden shield, but I did get it faced with linen, and I have it wrapped with or edged with leather. So I was able to look at historical accounts, and they either hide or linen wrapped their shields in order to prevent splinters from flying in their faces and to hold the wood all together. Um, it's a very sophisticated piece of equipment when you think about it. Like it's
yeah,
the linen is it's all glued together. It's wrapped under the boss. The leather is stitched into the edge of the shield. It's a beautiful piece of equipment, and
right.
I'm yeah.
I think that was also literally between the two of us our only points of contention between the two of us in terms of anachronism versus actual literal historical accuracy. Because I mean, for me, and I know Zach did this when he was Guthrum, and probably did his best to make sure his Vikings, on his side were as accurate as possible with their shields, although some of them not so much. But obviously, they would have completely been covered in leather, as in the
Yes.
entire surface. It wouldn't have been
Yes.
just, I think, for the most part, at least for you and for Canute, maybe a peasant would have just had wooden shield with planks, but someone of your status would have been able to have an actual shield. And I know I've kind of tried to push that on you, but ultimately, as a reenactorism, we have to find out what works for us financially, visually, as well as the materials that we have available to us. I don't know if you mentioned
Yeah.
it. I was actually thinking about a couple things that you referenced while you were talking there. So I'm weird. But did you say what the material is for the shield itself? The wood.
Oh, the wood. So I bought that shield back in 2019, I believe.
Okay.
Because I wanted to use it for a costume for an Assassin's Creed cosplay. Actually, back when Assassin's Creed Valhalla was announced, I was like, "Oh, cool! I can have a little round shield." So I will be honest, the wood itself is just plywood,
Um,
and it was made by Oakhart Armory. Um, but I knew that the plywood wouldn't be enough, so we did talk about the leather facing and the linen facing, but ultimately it was a matter of expense, because our good friend Thomas, the blacksmith, offered to do it, and he did a fantastic job, but it was a bit pricey. So I wanted to. That's why I edged it with leather to kind of hint at that, to kind of pay homage to leather faced shields. So I kind of have a middle ground. The linen has been holding up great. In fact, I've taken a few pretty heavy hits with it, and I look down at it, and where I would expect splinters to be, it's just a bit scuffing of the linen. So
mhm.
I'm like, this is
Yeah.
great. And
Zach. Oh, go ahead.
I've painted it in my colors. The crest of Edmund Ironside retroactively was it was blue and red with a gold cross in the center. So what I've done is I've painted it blue and red with almost a golden silhouette of the Galloway cross. And I've done the same thing for my banner. So I'm keeping a consistent theme going. But go ahead and talk about what Zach
Yeah.
did for Guthrum.
No, actually not even for Guthrum, but Zach himself, Zach, CH, for anybody on cast that might be listening, does do absolutely incredible work with shields and blood
Oh yes.
and a whole number of other things. So if you ever need a historically accurate shield, definitely commission him. But
He made my heater shield last year for John de Gram, and it
mhm,
was fantastic. It was such a beautiful shield to use.
yeah, and then the other point, and then I was thinking I made another one, but I reference this kind of any chance I get when it comes up. But when we mention how easy it is to fight with a shield, and use that as a weapon, and use that as a disposable weapon and piece of art,
Mhm.
it brings me to the point that it's easy to lose a shield. You can grab another shield. You may not be able to grab another weapon, which brings me
Right.
to a reference of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Season 5, of course, my favorite show, my favorite season. It's the episode when Buffy gets kind of, if we want to use modern terms, gets got by a vampire. And so she's trying to understand why. Why did she fail as a fighter? And maybe Edmund would have had those moments, or Canute, and tried to understand what he could do better. And she goes to Spike, a vampire character in the show that's known for having killed, I believe, 2 Slayers. And he mentions, a Buffy or a Slayer, or in this sense, we'll say a fighter out in the field fighting against either Viking or Saxon is, you need to reach for your weapon. I've already got mine. As a vampire, obviously, his weapon is his fangs. Otherwise,
Yeah.
there's nothing better versus Buffy with superhuman strength and whatever. But she needs to have a stake. She needs, quote unquote, a sword. So having the shield both as your shield, but also as your weapon, and also something that back then would have caught the weapons. Be it at the time, it would have been more prominent to have a poleaxe, or of course sword, axe, whatever,
Yeah.
turtle. Um, that would have allowed them to just then get rid of that shield, and then your opponent no longer has their weapon, and you've already got yours. Even if you
Exactly.
don't have another shield, you've disarmed them. And so round shields are so incredibly versatile in that sense. And I wanted to get that reference in there because it's the visual of someone coming down with their weapon and getting it stuck in the shield, or losing their weapon because of the shield, because you can use that
Yeah.
edge to push back and disarm or whatever. Because we can also hook. Dane axes had some of them had beers, you can hook them out, etc. Or a murder
Yeah.
stroke with the sword. Go all Kylo Ren on that. Um, this is direct message to other reenactors, specifically fighters. That's something that you can showcase, is that you don't just need a sword. You don't just need a belt with weapons on it. You can be set with just a sword or a poleaxe, staff, whatever. If you want to be Jarrah with staff and axe, um, we're the only ones that get that reference. But you can have that shield, and the shield, honestly, I wouldn't do double shield, but sometimes the shield really is all you need, and that is your first line of defense. But if you want to play off that, if your opponent only has a bardiche like Jake, because that's a two-handed weapon versus your sword and or axe and or dagger and shield, now not only can you disarm him with just your shield that you don't even need, he has to grab another weapon if he's got a Dane axe or a bardiche in the sense, or a spear or a staff or a double-handed sword. And you, as a fighter, now you have the advantage because you still have your weapon. You still have also your hand that is now
Right.
your shield. And while they have to evade or have to reach for their weapon, obviously, as a choreographer, we're gonna roll out of the way. We're gonna do a quick step drag or drag step, whatever. Use a cover because we need to prolong the fight, unless this is a kill shot. But I love the visual of you've got your weapon, but the opponent, they need to get theirs, and I don't think
Yeah.
we utilize that enough. And that's a beautiful reference from Buffy that I keep bringing up because it to me it keeps applying to what we do, and I don't ever really see it ever being used. Obviously, Buffy, it's a fantasy show. It's fangs versus uh, a wooden stake. But
Mhm.
I love kind of relating certain things that people might get in popular culture. I don't watch Marvel, so I can't use that. But
You're not missing much. It's okay.
I did watch Werewolf by Night, but that's a whole digression.
Ah.
But yeah, we got off talking. We were discussing things. You continue.
Well, yeah, just real quick, I'm glad you mentioned that because we actually do utilize a few moments where um, he loses a weapon and then he actually gets a hold of my shield, and so it's a sword versus a shield. So you'll have to see the fight in its entirety. It's a beautiful thing. I'm really proud of it. But
Okay.
anyway,
Before we
yeah.
actually do, I don't know if I want to save this for last, but I'll just say it now. But going off on the concept of reenactorism, historical adequacy, anachronism, specifically in our show, because our show, me especially, I'm not going to hot take anybody without insulting myself first, because if you know, you know the reference. But
Okay.
Jake, if you listen, and this is quite a ways into the show, but don't think that I'm Jim Cornetting you. But you and I, Caleb, really deep dived and delved into the research of this kit, both historical as well as what's adequate. And I
Mhm.
mean, I hunted down historians to ask, research papers that I've had to purchase so that we could reference, and a lot of just deep diving and debate between us in terms of things that you can get away with just historically adequate, not like the shield thing where it's like,
Mhm.
well, not money matter, but like, is this legit? Like, kind of like the Gambison. But I've seen some video of all of you guys, not specifically your fight, but and pictures, and seeing the dichotomy, the very stark difference between the way you look and you carry yourself versus him. I don't want to insult him, but because he looks amazing by my standards. Because if I'm going to insult any sort of kit, I was the most anachronistic person on cast ever, except for the 1 year where someone wore plastic. So I look at his versus yours, and yours is so much more. I don't want to say I don't want to insult him because I love him, but in depth, perhaps a bit more edging toward historical accuracy. Whereas I see he's wearing more practical. Everything's black. He's got the Son of Sandlers. I don't know if he's wearing cotton as a main thing. I don't know what he's doing. So I do want to actually get into also his kit after yours, if we even at least just gloss over it. But
yeah, and honestly, that's my curse, because I obsess over accuracy to the point where I actually look more out of place than the rest of the cast, because I've done all this research, I've done all this double checking and making sure that is this accurate for the time period, is this accurate, that by the time I'm done and I look at everybody, everyone else matches with each other, and then I'm the outlier. So I totally understand what you're saying. It's Jake has done a great job, and he's actually not quite finished with his kit.
Oh yeah, and like I said, Jake, if you ever listen, or Tina, of course, because Tina's was previously for a very long time, and I value her opinion on it. Costume director.
She still is.
But touche. But Jake looks like what I would have looked like as Canute if I were Canute, or Guthrum or whatever. And I love the way he looks, but now having had that sort of mind to get into the research,
now that your eyes are open, you're like, oh,
wait a minute, yeah. is that black? Is that those? What? But
I can't tell you how many times I've had to tell people black didn't exist yet, and people give me looks, and I'm like, I'm sorry, it's true, it didn't exist yet.
That's going to be a whole discussion with Steph of her Viking group, as well as maybe even a whole podcast episode in itself. The color black, because that's a very, very hotly, I won't even say debated, that's just a very viciously argued point. But like I said, I'm someone who, if we don't have strict evidence or literal cloth for it, then you know what? And to those deniers, like the weird person that had to personally message me on here about cotton, because I said cotton, I don't know. Yes, it was around, but availability. Watch the Welsh Viking, who was also a big reference for our research here, at least a starting point.
Yes.
He has an entire episode dedicated to trying to get black, trying to get natural, literal ink
it's
black.
So difficult.
You can't do it.
You can't.
So at least until they figured out how. So I don't know.
Which happened black, like late medieval.
Yeah, I'm a space goth cowboy. I love my black. I wear all black. My entire wardrobe is black. But and obviously my anachronistic self would have been like, Alfred, yeah, I'm wearing all black. I'll just put on a blue tunic. But you know what? We're gothing it. But yeah, I love how he looks. So don't think I'm kind of throwing you under the bus. But it is definitely a stark difference between delving into the research and actually trying to nitpick what you wear as it pertains to historical adequacy and accuracy versus clear and obvious anachronism for the sake of practical nature, right?
Yeah.
So
and what's on hand, what you have on hand from previous years, and expenses and all that. Yeah. So
Jake is wearing a very beautiful, very practical kit, and you obviously you spent the money, you did the research and nitpicked. So it's a completely different approach. Both are completely and utterly valid in the foundation of the festival we do, because our festival
ultimately,
Mm,
we aren't a reenactment. We put on
no.
a historically based show. So
Yeah.
we're not asking people to wear the most accurate things. This is a personal uh, handicap that I put on myself. I told myself,
Yeah.
hey,
You're
you gotta be
nuzlocking.
accurate.
You're nuzlocking in Pokemon
Yeah,
terms. But
yeah,
yeah, no,
exactly.
we are the WWE. You know, we are
Right.
AEW if you like AEW. We're professional wrestling basically.
Yeah.
Some of us get into it. You know, some of us are Bret Hart. Some of us are not. So I would definitely classify by Jake as that sort of Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels talent, upper echelon.
Yeah.
So no throwing
Um,
under the bus for him or Tina. I love them both. But
no,
I wanted
they're
to
doing
kind of
great.
reference that stark difference, and it is okay to be anachronistic if it's okay in your group. But
Yes.
we definitely digressed. But continue finishing up your kit. All right, so we had a small break, as denoted by absolutely no special effect that I put in there because I'm lazy. But we were just discussing, of course, to remind ourselves here, your fight partner's kit, which is a bit more of really a vague blanket statement of everybody's kit. And I love the way he looks. It's the way I would do it. But let's get back on track to your kit and then how we came to it. Um, I'll be honest, as I mentioned before we even started, again, I forget where we left off. So I know we went over your helm, as you mentioned, boots, Meningas, some small decorum, such as rings, the fasteners for the Weningas, as well as your brooches, penannular brooch.
Hmm.
Um, oh, actually, yeah, you're using a penannular brooch, right? Or are you using a disc brooch?
Oh, so yeah. So for my cloak, I am using a disc brooch. In fact, Saxons used more often disc brooches
Hmm.
than the Danes used
Yeah.
penannular brooches. Um, and the brooch that I found is a find from Pitney, which was an actual 11th century Anglo-Saxon tree whittle design brooch. So I based that. I took that inspiration and I was like, I want this replica. I think it'll look fantastic. We That's when we talked about um, using actual historical finds. How some people want to use just historical artifacts or basing it off of historical artifacts and stuff
Hmm.
like that.
Historical
Um,
accuracy versus historical adequacy.
right, that's the correct term. So
I
let's
actually have a
see.
real quick question on your cloak.
Yeah.
Um, Ooh, I have a blue pen. Why am I using blue? I don't like that. I got a black pen now. Okay. I have a notepad, obviously, from our previous session that I write things down
Mhm.
to ask you. But your cloak, because I'm working on. Well, no. Well, now I have to work on two. But I'm working on a cloak for my historically accurate Viking kit, and there I'm going to ask you two questions. One is a debate. The second one is specifically the material and shape. What shape is your cloak, and what is the material?
So the material is linen. It was ordered from the same place that I ordered my tunic linen from. Uh, and yeah, it's a midnight blue color. I know a lot of people might say to me, "Hey, Anglo-Saxons had nice bright colors. Why are you using muted colors?" Well, because one, it was a style choice
Mhm.
because uh, my fight partner, or in fact the entire Danish side, is using similar colors but brighter.
Well, yeah.
So we wanted that mirror image almost. And my cloak shape is rectangular,
Okay.
as
So
I
that's
learned from the Welsh Viking.
I mean, there's all shapes and sizes, but I think that's a little bit more. That one is a bit more prominent that I've seen in terms of that period in reenactment.
Right.
As is mine. As is mine. But some people. I'm not getting into the debate question yet, but some people tend to put in. Um, and this is specifically talking about actual historical adequacy slash accuracy specific, but Lenin and then wool. Granted, you're in Florida, though you're probably not going to use wool as a cloak. But
Right.
although side digress, I used Adam's felt cloak one year, and that was when I was Alfred, the yellow felt cloak. And I don't think I want to use felt ever again. But anywho, where was I going? You pretty much answered everything. But then it's okay. So the debatable one. So there's various ways of utilizing your cloak. My big research point at the moment, I'm still working on a Hollywood medieval video based on Father Bayoka in The Last Kingdom, just season 1. And the biggest hang up that I'm on, because I cannot find anything in the time period that we're talking about, which obviously is the time period of Alfred, specifically because that's The Last Kingdom, is hoods, right? Is yours just straight up cloak, or is there a hood to it?
There is no hood to it. I didn't feel as a king that I wanted to cover my head all too often, and I didn't want the extra material weighing me down throughout the day, because again, we're in Florida, and I just because you can fashion, the Welsh Viking taught me that you can fashion your cloak, your rectangular shaped cloak, into a hood if you wanted to. You can bring it up more around your shoulders, you can throw it over your head and then pin it to the side. But I mean, if it rains, I'm probably going to find shelter. I'm not going to be wandering around, because I have too many things on me that could rust quickly or could just get not damaged, but it would just look bad if it got super duper wet. Obviously, our show is rain or shine, and obviously, I mean, if you're in war and battle, rain's not going to hinder you. But I do want to look presentable, and I do want to have an air of sharpness to me when I'm walking in the lanes. And if it starts raining, I am going to pull my entourage under shelter and make bits and shows there. So no, it does not come with a hood, but it can be fashioned in an emergency for one.
See, that's my preference, because the issue that I'm having is in The Last Kingdom, Father Bayoka is wearing it's been a while since I've been working on that video, but I don't know if he's wearing a robe that has a hood on it, or if he's wearing a cloak that has a hood on it, but I've seen zero evidence to suggest that they were making separate or sewn together hood/cloak robes. And that's the biggest hang up that I'm trying to find, is when did the hood become its own thing, and when did the hood, as in you got a hood and then you got a whole cloak or robe, when was that a thing, right? So
I know what you're talking about, because I've wondered the same thing.
Yeah, like at that time period, and obviously we're referencing Jimmy a lot, Jimmy and the Welsh Viking, because he kind of covers this vaguely, not really, but in terms of the Romans were doing it with just a rectangular cloak, square cloak. So you can get a hood out of that, but I do see some people in our cast. Ooh, I dropped my pen that I made a big fuss about. I do see people on cast wearing hooded cloaks, and I'm just like, oh, nothing against that, but I'm just like, when did that start? But that's a digress. So we've talked about your chainmail, and have we gone about on the tunic?
We did. I mentioned that it was a knee-length tunic. It's burgundy, full sleeve. We did actually just finish putting trim on it. So as of now, as we came back to our break, I put trim on it, and it has trim on the cuff, the hem, and the neckline, and it looks very spiffy. And I'm very happy I did that.
Is it more embroidery-like, or sort of just the typical kind of Joanne fabric trim?
No, I did want to do something more, what's the word? Complicated, or I guess, more work involved. I didn't want to just rely on Joanne's. Catherine and I call it Old Reliable, the Old Reliable trim. But we ordered it on Etsy from France, and it's a jacquard woven fabric, so it is made from a machine, but it isn't the scratchy polyester kind of feel that you think of when you think of jacquard ribbon. It's not that at all. It's actually very soft to the touch. It's very sturdy. It's got beautiful geometric designs all throughout it. It has a cream tan base, and then there's bronze and gold threads sewn onto it into those geometric patterns. So on close inspection, you can actually see a ton of detail put into it. And I'm really happy we found it, because otherwise I would have had to get something from Joann's. But it did take a little bit of time to come in. It took about 3 weeks. But once it came in, it's coming from France overseas. But once it came in, I mean, it's beautiful, and I'm really happy I got it. Yeah.
I mean, in the meantime, between our session here, obviously this is a week apart for those listening. I just got and I'm not a big fan of imports, mind you. I do try to go local, but if you're also trying to do a historical Viking era, quote unquote, then you're kind of limited. But I just got in like a whole reindeer from Scandinavia. From
Nice.
Local people up there. Not like a factory or a slaughterhouse. I don't do that. But that took 30 days getting stuck in customs down in Memphis, Tennessee, and I'm like, okay. And then finally came in. You know, it's mainly for the cats, right?
Yeah.
One cat likes to sleep on the deer, the other one sleeps on the reindeer. So
right.
But yeah, so is that the one that you sent me in the chat, the pictures of that Tina approved? Or that you
no, we actually went through several iterations. We were like, is this good? Is this good? Is this good? And Tina approved most of them, and she was very kind to do so. We did approve this one with her. I just forgot to send it to you. But I can send it to you after we're done here and have you check it out. But it's beautiful. We did try to find local, but local would have taken too long, and the designs just weren't as intricate as I wanted.
Yeah, I know. I just did a hot take on Jake, or a non-hot take, or kind of like a side swerve of his outfit. But I definitely want to put this out there because I didn't realize Tina was on cast this year and still doing the costume directing, which would have been nice to know. But now that I'm getting more thoroughly into the historical aspect of what we do, and more specifically the sewing and the costuming, I have a much deeper appreciation for the effort and the work that Tina puts into her job on cast. I guess I took it for granted because I just never kind of had the interest in history as much as I do as, say, paleontology. But now that I kind of have this deeper insight, I do deeply appreciate the effort she goes to, and understand and acknowledge that she may never listen to this, but maybe Jake will. You know, I appreciate the fact that you do try to, and I'm talking to Tina, you do try to keep us historically accurate, but that so many people on cast have just kind of settled with the kit they already have. You know, I'm talking about like sandlers and whatnot and whatever, and all the black and baseball pants. That you can only do so much. So I appreciate you retroactively, I guess, the work that you do. But hopefully that gets to her. And anyway, but I'm glad she is then, so that you have someone who, you know, also has books and references, and someone who's gonna make sure that you're wearing something that's actually appropriate. Even though, I mean, granted, I'm sure everyone else on cast is not, right? But it depends. I just remember that one year, that King Arthur year, where someone was wearing a Walmart cloak, and then that
2017.
Yeah, that one girl came in trying to look like a Renaissance princess, and then your fight partner is wearing sweatpants, and I'm like, oh my god, where's Tina? You were talking about the trim, and then so we already spoke about your helm,
We
of
talked about the
course,
shield and
but
the
is
linen
there?
faced and leather edge and all
Mhm,
that, and the the differences between linen and hide wrapped shields and the effectiveness of their use.
mhm. So I feel like we've kind of covered you head to
Pretty
toe
much. I
at this
did want to
point.
talk about my sword if I could have a few moments for that.
By all means, that's a very important part of kit for those that are
So,
fighting.
Edmund Ironside was historically noted to use the or a sword of King Offa of Mercia, who lived about 200 years prior. Um,
Mhm.
it was given to him by his late brother Ethelstan, who died 2 years before 1016. It was in his will, and historians found it and transcribed it, and it said that uh, a collection of weapons and armor would have been given to Edmund. So it's actually really cool because that means that Edmund and Ethelstan were very similar to us nowadays. Like they liked armor that people wore a long time ago and weapons. Um, so the sword. So this is part of my initial man. I really want to be King Edmund, but I really don't want to overstep my bounds and just assume, right? So I took the
Mhm.
very bold move of commissioning a sword before I knew who my character was. But not without reason, because I'm also going to use the sword I'm using in the fair this year as my wedding sword next year in October. So it was already going to serve a purpose. So I wasn't getting a sword and then having the chance that, oh, you can't use it this year, and then I just wasted money on it. No, it was already going to serve a purpose, so I was totally fine with commissioning it. But I commissioned it in such a way. I talked to Chris Fields from Sterling Armory, obviously a super knowledgeable guy who has taken care of us for several years now. Um, I commissioned the sword to be a Type XA or 10A arming sword, and the 10A or the 10 was basically your typical Viking sword. When you think of a Viking sword, you think of the single hand grip, a distinctive pommel, basically virtually no crossguard, and a very wide blade with a wide fuller. Well, I didn't want that one specifically because I knew I was going to use the sword for things other than just a Viking gear. So I commissioned the 10A, which had a narrower fuller, a longer blade, a more distinctive crossguard, and a round pommel, which was basically, if you think of a crusader sword, that's the sword I got. So it still falls within the 11th century timeline. It just may be a bit later down the road. But I felt much more comfortable with getting this than getting a distinctive Viking sword. It has a red leather grip, brass crossguard, and brass pommel, or bronze, I should say. And I even had him etch a Latin word in the blade, or in the fuller. It says resurgimos, which means we rise in Latin. Um, and that's the sword I commissioned.
And that's pretty. And there's some swords that have
Yes.
runes etched into them, and so on and so forth. Obviously,
Yeah.
that's a thing. It's a
It's a
move.
beautiful sword. I'm so lucky to have it. It's one of my favorite pieces I've ever owned. Uh, and I'm happy to use it this
Mhm.
year. So that's the sword. I have the sword, shield, armor, my outfit, my cloak, all of that. I even have a banner that we made depicting Edmund's colors, which is something I wanted to touch on as well. What would Edmund's colors have been? Well, that's pretty impossible to say. We have seen some pictures of him retroactively in maybe 14th century art of him wearing a lot of blue. So I did take that inspiration, but I also looked up the coat of arms for the Ironside name. Now, coat of arms at this time didn't quite exist. Tabards didn't exist. Standards existed, so you could have a banner and your standard with a sigil of the house. But this specific coat of arms was a a heater shield that's half dark blue and half dark red, and in the center is a golden cross, a Jerusalem cross, I should say, which means that the arms are equidistant to each other. And I looked at that, I'm like, oh man, that right there is what I want. And so I have the shield painted red and blue with a gold cross. My banner is red and blue with a gold cross. I have a red tunic and a blue cloak. So those are the colors that I've been sticking with. Those are the coat of arms, and this is on my topic of retroactive history or experimental archaeology. Obviously, we don't know what his coat of arms would have been at this time period because it was before, if he even had any. But
because I know, I mean, knights didn't exist
until the
back then,
Normans
so-
came. The Norman knight, 50 years after Azandun, was probably the earliest iteration of a knight that we know of today. So your tabard didn't exist, your coat of arms didn't exist, but because there is a coat of arms for the Ironside name, I can retroactively add that to my costume, even though it may not be the most accurate, even though historians may be like, well, I mean, the coat of arms what came first, the knight or the coat of arms, you know?
Well, then there's a curious question, because you say Ironside, but that was a nickname that was given to him. What about his actual surname?
Well, since he was Edmund II, he would have been a Edmund Etheling, descendant of Alfred, descendant of Ethelred. You know, that's how those names work, because the Danes used son and daughter as their surname. So like Canute would have been Canute Svensson. But
But I mean, in terms of looking up the colors and whatnot, you chose Ironside, which was the nickname, as opposed to what his real name was.
Because he was more well known by Ironside than his own surname. The Danes gave him that name because of his staunch protection against England, against them. So I just, and there have been other people in history with the name Ironside. In fact, there's a World War II soldier who was named Edmund Ironside, which was actually really cool. So Ironside has retroactively become a name that can be used as your name instead of a moniker. So I decided to incorporate that into the character, you know, almost using Ironside as his name instead of Edmund Etheling, because no one's going to call me that in the lanes. Everyone's going to say Edmund Ironside.
Which is strange, because he didn't get it until posthumous?
No, he did receive the name during his defense. Yes. Oh, okay. That was something I had to double check. During the fight against Canute specifically. So Edmund had already been fighting against the Danes for a long time. But once Ethelred was found to be a coward, once he was hiding in London, here comes this Saxon lord, the Saxon prince, who is just rallying these farmers and these conscripts to his side and defeating these well-trained Danes. The Danes were taken aback. They're like, who is this guy? And Canute specifically found out who he was and gave him the name Ironside during their battles. So as of the Battle of Azandun, he was known as Edmund Ironside, not Edmund Etheling.
Mm-hmm.
Atheling,
yeah. The ash symbol. My Viking character is Athelwulf, and it's always interesting when telling people that the variety of pronunciations that people have for it, or they call you Ethel. I'm like, no, it's a full name. It's not Ethel and then Wolf. But anywho, so that's a good reference to sort of that delineation of his name, and then applying that to your kit. And I don't have anywhere else to go from there. But anything further in regards to your kit?
No, I mean, thankfully during this time period there was it's the small things are intricate and detailed, but the bigger things like your helmet, your shield, your armor, I mean, those were pretty simple compared to what would become in like the 15th century, you know. They wore a helmet, with an arming cap, a coat of mail, a shield, and armed with a spear and sword and sacks. Oh, yeah, I should have mentioned I do have a sax that I'm wearing on my belt. That's what what the Anglo-Saxons got their name from. The sax, which is Old English for knife. I had a custom sheath made for it. It's a bone-handled sax, or seeks if you prefer. Our good friend Thomas Luttrell fixed it up for me and made a brand new sheath for it. So it's very sturdy. I do use it in the fight, and it's also a tool, so I use it for eatery, for symbolism. I can use it to point at people. It's a demarcation of being a freed man. You are a noble freed man if you wear a sax on your belt. So, but that's pretty much it as far as the kit I have prepared. I think we can start talking about how I came to prepare it. I know I just touched on the colors in the banner, delineating that from the retroactive name, being the coat of arms. But yeah, so let's start on that.
Indeed. So this section will kind of be more of a guide, a sort of a how-to for people that might be wanting to find something that is specifically historically accurate / adequate, something that without a shadow of a doubt you can wear, whether it's SCA, whether you're doing film, festival, like we do, or otherwise. Maybe you're just trying to get a kit together for Halloween, since this episode's airing on Halloween. Day of, yeah. So I have the Discord, of course. Just a reminder, we do have a Ko-fi. You can support us if you want. If you do, you get an access to the Discord, which has a lot of channels. One section is called the Artisans Quarter. That is where we all can post a relevant kit and show that off and such. But obviously, we ourselves here that do the show, we have our own private section. And I kind of had to segregate a little bit for historical resources for other people. But on the Discord, I do post a lot of, whether it's relevant or not to what we're doing, a lot of historical papers that I have access to. Not a lot of people do. So since I do pay for that, I like to post it, if I can legally say that. At least privately, right? And then, it's always knowledge and education should always be open for discussion and open to the public. But that's my little hot take right there. Why are we paying for education? But anywho, what besides me, besides the Discord, besides what we went through, what sort of access and resource would you really have? Like, would you be able to, from square one, knowing that you want to be Edmund, what would you have been able to do to gather the kit or the education that you needed to make this accurate or adequate attire?
Yeah. So let's see. The first thing that I started to do was look up the character itself, or himself. I researched him online. I researched him on YouTube. There's actually several videos on YouTube that explain in detail the history. Obviously, you have to take some things with a grain of salt. Like, for example, the so-called duel between Canute and Edmund probably didn't happen. They most likely met at the island of Alnay and simply agreed to a treaty and then gave each other gifts and went on their merry ways. But some articles like to play up the fact that Edmund challenged Canute to a duel, and because Edmund was the greatest swordsman in his time, Canute was terrified and refused initially, but nonetheless agreed to a duel, which Edmund soundly beat him in, and then Canute said, "No, please, sir, please spare me. Let us come up with a treaty." There's embellishments that take place. In fact, what happened was that they actually talked for a long, long time. Like, it was actually, the armies were recorded to have waited quite a long time while they were just talking one-on-one. which I find very interesting. So anyway, so I started looking up the character, and then I had to start looking up armor. Surprisingly enough, I looked up armor and weapons first before I went on to the actual costuming itself, because that would be the heavier thing that you would wear, and so you want to know how your body moves in it. Your body can move in a well-made, fabric shirt or tunic. That's not the biggest worry. As even for footwear, I knew that I could move in pretty much whatever footwear I got, because I'm used to flat-soled shoes. I'm used to rubber-soled shoes. So I looked up armor first. I looked up mail. I looked up helmets, and the way I looked those up is so I'm going to say this: I avoided Wikipedia like the plague, as anyone worth their salt would if they were truly trying to go. I'm not trying to mock anyone who uses Wikipedia. If you use Wikipedia and you're referencing the sources that Wikipedia has listed, good on you. But if you're solely using Wikipedia, you're reading the little paragraphs and you say, oh, it's good enough for me, I think you're doing yourself a disservice. There are so many resources, as you, NC, have graciously given me over these last few months during research time. But yeah, so I looked up armor. I researched helmets. I said, what kind of helmets would they have used? From there, what types of helmets would, so the nasal helm, cool. How many different variations of nasal helms could they have? Cool. What type of nasal helm would Edmund have used? Cool. I'm going to use this one. And then I started to look at footwear. I think the biggest or the hardest thing to research throughout this time was footwear, because I remember asking you many times, hey, would this work? What kind of finds would they have had from burial sites? Because
and since it's leather,
it deteriorates super fast. Another interesting point about specifically Anglo-Saxon history is that it's hard to find anything Anglo-Saxon buried in England. Most things that were Anglo-Saxon were actually buried later in Denmark, in Norway, in Scotland, because the Danes still had the tradition of burying their dead with all their possessions. But the Saxons had long since gotten rid of that. The Sutton Hoo burial site, the Staffordshire burial site, those were all from 6th, 7th, 8th century Anglo-Saxon. But for anything, 9th, 10th, 11th century, they had stopped burying their dead with all their possessions, because you wouldn't need that in heaven, that was their thinking. But the Danes were still doing that. So the stuff that they took from the Saxons, they buried with them far away in their own territory. So I actually had to research more in order to find Anglo-Saxon artifacts. I had to look at Viking or Danish, Scandinavian burial sites and artifacts. So that was difficult to balance the two. Like, was this Danish? Was this Saxon? How to differentiate between the two. And I remember talking with you a lot about that. I'm like, well, this was found here, but would it have been used here? I think that was the most common question I asked you and other people. I was like, well, if it was found here, do you think it could have migrated over here, or would it have been found over here? I think.
Yeah, a big debate on that one would be like cotton.
Right, right. That was my biggest point of contention for historical clothing and other things. Is it's just hard to know because they were organic materials. So the next step was to find research papers on them, and in fact, I found quite a few on Anglo-Saxon research papers. Basically, anything I typed into my search engine, I would scroll down quite a ways past all of the main articles until I found stuff that was further down the search bar, because for some reason I knew that would be more accurate because it wouldn't be well known. people wouldn't go to those articles as much because they would just look at Wikipedia. So one of the main resources I found was world.for.org. And it sounds weird, but it actually gave a super in-depth description of, okay, Anglo-Saxons wore stockings, and they wore specific breeches that came down to a certain point on their knee, and they could also wear cross gartering, which was made from leather strips or fabric strips that wound up their leg into crossed sections. In fact, finding any examples of Anglo-Saxons wearing winingas was difficult, but I was able to find a few mentions of that. Also, almost doing experimental archaeology, well, winingas were used by the Danes, and the Danes had been living in England for a long time, so it's fair to assume that Saxons would have adopted the practice of wrapping their legs. That it sounds like a lot. It sounds confusing, but once everything lined up in place, it was very easy to find resources and to reference things. You helped me a lot with that. You sent me articles. Some of them were like documents, like actual Word documents that you couldn't edit, but you could read. But they were typed up by an actual historian, so it would be almost impossible to find online.
Yeah, and that's something that needs to change. I know in our current modern era, it's kind of turned into a microtransaction subscription-based universe, which is ridiculous and stupid. But one of the problems with academia is it's always has been behind a paywall. And so, at least here on our medieval content Discord channel, I've kind of tried to take it upon myself to find free articles as well as ones that are behind paywalls for us to use as reference, because otherwise, how do you find that? How do you have access to that? I mean, there's some hacks you can do to get in there without paying, but I mean, if the information is valuable, I don't mind paying. I just feel like nobody should have to. But also, one thing I've realized in being able to, even if you want to try to get these research papers or this knowledge that you may never get with a Google search, or even the books, in this time period that we were discussing everything, I've also, anytime you brought something up, I looked for a book that had it in it. And now I have almost 100 books of academia. And I think I sent a couple to you, a couple to our director. I still need to send one to Kate. But even still, you can, if you don't want to pay for it, or you really don't have access, you can also look up the writer, assuming the writer is still alive. One big thing I did was I researched the person themselves and tried to see if they had a social media account, and then follow them on Twitter or the Instagrams, if they're a book writer and they're a little bit modern enough. But a lot of the stuff is written by dead people.
Yeah.
So, there's only so much someone can access unless you pay for it. So, I mean, I've got information here on the Discord for people, but I mean, I feel for someone like Tina and our cast, who, our cast, the only outlet might only be Tina, and maybe she can't afford to go online and do this extensive research and waste that time, waste that money. But I feel like that's invaluable information that really helped carve the niche look that someone who wants a historically accurate / adequate kit really kind of needs to delve into in order to reach that. And maybe that's why pretty much everybody on our cast, at least, looks like they're at a plastic strawberry festival rather than a quote unquote medieval festival.
And to that point, I tried my hardest to make sure everyone had resources available. I mean, here's one website from Octavia Randolph about Anglo-Saxon medieval clothing, and it references pictures, art. It breaks down everything that has been found over the years for Anglo-Saxons. And then you look her up, and she says that she's been studying this for most of her life, and she's still alive. So I was like, boom, this resource right here. I knew immediately that it was going to be as accurate as possible, because all research is granted, there are facts that you have to take into account, but if you don't have those facts, if you're not an archaeologist yourself, you have to take someone's word for it, and you have to cross-reference that with what what scientists and archaeologists have found. And because you can look at this, and you can read about her, and you can reference what she's referencing, you can go back and say, oh, okay, I know that she's mostly correct. I mean, she's done her due diligence to make sure I got this information. Why would she lie to me? There's also,
and a good point. A good point is what I was trying to get to with the social media thing. Sometimes if the writer, the researcher is alive, and you just ask them for the paper or the information, I find most people will actually just send it to you, because it's more important to them that this information is out there than if some website receives money off of their work, because they're probably not getting
and
it.
I remember that you sent me a lot of resources regarding the Viking Age, specifically Scandinavians. Well, I'm playing an Anglo-Saxon. Why would this help me at all? Well, it's because Anglo-Saxons wore very similar clothing and outfits to the Danes. In fact, sometimes they would almost be indistinguishable, except from their language, their accents, their hair.
I see them as sort of two sides of a coin. So, you have the dichotomy that, yes, they're in a different quote unquote region. I would say region, country, right? Scandinavia. But at this point, we're not dealing with the Scandinavians. We're dealing with people. We are dealing with people that have been in England for hundreds of years, and even in the time of Alfred, the hundreds of years earlier, they were still exchanging things. The Saxons sold Scandinavian traders their weapons, and that's how the Vikings, the actual raiders, pirates, not the Scandinavians themselves, but the pirate versions would be able to fight and beat the Saxons. So there's a lot of interchanging ideas, interchanging goods. There's a lot of trade, and there's a lot of, honestly, if you look at the Saxons and the Scandinavians, they kind of look the same anyway. There's just a few bits of minutia between them that you also, you see that here in the modern era too. Someone from America isn't going to look that much different from someone in England. But also you got to delineate the differences. So obviously, using a disc approach as
exactly, it's the little things, like as far as art goes, Anglo-Saxons really love their beasts. They love their geometric shapes, and they also loved incorporating the remnants of Celtic or Celtic origins, like swirling, intertwining knotting. Whereas the Danes, since they had access to imports, they would have worn several different in fact, flowers. The flower designs wasn't introduced to the Saxons until Normandy came around, until the Normans invaded, and the Normans were descendants of the Danes and the Norwegians. So in fact, my fiance, she's using this very beautiful rose petal flower trim, and it also looks really good. It's soft to the touch. It doesn't crinkle. It's not uber shiny. And there's that cool difference between them, because if you have her and the English Queen stand next to each other without trim, you might not be able to tell the difference. Like, oh, okay, which one's which? But because she's able to put on a trim that isn't the same as the English Queen, there's that difference. The audience can say, oh, okay, I know that she's Danish and she's Saxon, simply because of the intricate details that each one is wearing. And that's something that really helped me out. I was like, man, how am I supposed to make myself look different? I thought about, man, should I wear leggings the leggings look ridiculous on me, and I'd much rather wear the trousers. And then I realized, oh wait, I can still wear the trousers. I just got to wear slightly different turn shoes, or I can put a penannular brooch instead of, or a disc brooch on my cloak instead of a penannular brooch like Knut's going to do. So if you're looking, if you're struggling, so like same thing with the French and English in the 100 Years' War. The French were very, very detail oriented, but the English were as well to an extent. But when they were in full plate armor, this is something that our friend Colin taught me, actually. When they wore full plate armor, there was very few ways to tell the difference between them aside from their colors and their coat of arms. The French didn't often wear sabatons, which were basically the plated metal shoes that you would wear with your suit of armor. They didn't wear them, but the English did. So if you were in a field of knights and it was an English versus French scenario and you couldn't tell who was who, look down at their feet, and then you'll usually be steered in the right direction. And I was like, that's so simple, but it's such a big difference between the two. So the same thing for this year. The Saxons and Danes, very similar to each other, but there's all those little smaller details that you have to pay close attention to differentiate them.
Mm-hmm. And that's also up for debate. I'm sure some people probably agree with the approach we had in that regard, or disagree. It don't matter. It's reenactment. It's a festival. So it's always dependent on. And I'm not throwing Tina under the bus, but I say it's always dependent on the group. What is appropriate with the group. Like for our show, we're a festival. We're not performing for ourselves like SEA. We're performing for other people. So, our group, I've noticed, and I always throw our festival under the bus for it, but I was always the worst one doing it. But our group is like in no way, shape, or form historically accurate. I know Tina's tried desperately, but So with us, you can pretty much stretch the rules, but that's why this episode is very specific about how do you stay within for yourself, and what are the outlets that you can use. Obviously the biggest resource I feel like we use, and I use myself for my kit and everything, is Etsy. But more specifically, not just the website, but for me at least, I always, because I don't know how many people know this, but you can actually click it so that, obviously, yes, you only get products that are in the United States. You can also tab it so that you only get handmade products. But many people might not know, but you can also specify where you want it to come from. So for me, I might, if you want to stay local, you can put your zip code in there. So for a lot of things with you, I would put the zip code of the town we lived in Florida and see what was very specifically in that town. You might even be able to actually just, instead of going to Etsy, find that person who might even be a neighbor and go from there. So Etsy is a great source, politics of Etsy, the website itself aside, but Etsy is a great source to find local craftspeople who may have the resources you're looking for that you may not need to import. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you really do have to import, but if you don't want to, Etsy is a great source for finding people. I would say is a good launching pad, for local searches. Otherwise, you can go into your local group, the group you're performing with, right? But I feel like Etsy was a great help here in finding stuff, because there's a lot of. I was surprised by the amount of stuff we were able to find.
For real, like one of the most popular things that I was able to find was the leg wraps, and that was from a shop located in Georgia. And I've referenced that shop, Avalon Natural, to as many people as I could, and everyone's been buying. So I'm really hoping that shop gets even bigger, because she's just a great person. She sends stuff out super fast, and she's very communicative. Most of my jewelry was also found locally, or at least in the U.S. The Pitney brooch was actually a replica made here. in the U.S. As was my wasn't the ring, not the ring I had, Pitney brooch, the wraps, I think the Galloway cross as well. That might have come from overseas though. I can't quite remember. But I did try to find as many local places as I could. We did find some trim, like I told you, that was local, but unfortunately it was made to order, and there was just no time for that. I mean, as of this recording, we're 2 weeks from show, and my trim, I was worried it wouldn't get here in time, but it finally did come through overseas. But that's because it was already made. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, no.
And in fact, obviously, once this airs, it is literally going to be the Monday before show.
it's coming up fast.
The week of show. So, yeah, it's. I feel like I know we're kind of wrapping up the episode here now, since we kind of divulged into everything we perhaps wanted to. If anything else pops up, I'm planning on doing some actual live panels on the channel, whether it's podcast related or maybe a separate series. But we can divulge into it there. But I feel like a lot of people need to know what a good starting point is for getting their kit together. I understand this is a very long episode, and I'm kind of lazy in terms of sectioning, categorizing topics. I should probably do the Jim Cornette thing where he uploads small snippets of the podcast, but that's also time consuming and I got other videos to do. But is there anything you wanted to add as a sort of final note, either on your kit, the show we're doing, or how to get into getting a kit together within the confines of being historically accurate?
I would love to touch on how to get started. My biggest thing, my biggest advice would be, don't be afraid to ask these types of groups. Don't be afraid to reach out on Facebook, online, and forums and say, hey, I'm trying to get started on a kit. What could you guys help me with? And 9 times out of 10, you'll get very friendly responses. You'll get people wanting to help, resources. I've asked people on Reddit. I know that sounds like a weird place to ask, but Reddit really does have tons of subreddits. I'm in an arms and armor subreddit. I'm in a historical costuming subreddit, and I've reached out. I said, and I said, hey, I'm trying to get this 11th century costume started. What do I need? And oftentimes they'll private message you and they'll say, hey man, really, really happy that you've taken an interest. Here's some of the things that helped me. And you can go to their profile and you can see what they look like. And usually it looks pretty darn good. Facebook as well. I joined last year. I joined a society of Sir John de Graham because that was the character I was playing, and he was a historical character. And a lot of Scots love him. He was basically the hero until he died. And I reached out to them. I said, hey guys, I would love specifically how to act like a Scottish lord, how to act like a knight. And they told me, and I was able to incorporate it into the character. This year, I joined an Anglo-Saxon Society Facebook group. And I know that may sound cultish and weird, but it's really not. It's just it's just a group that people, they post historical sources, they post articles, they show videos, pictures of their own reenactments, and I've been using them as a resource. So my biggest point, if you take anything away from this whole episode, don't be afraid to reach out and ask, because there is a huge community that's been growing for years around medieval reenactment and historical reenactment, and people want to help.
On that note, though, I've written a couple things down. So obviously, I'm in quite a few Viking related Facebook groups, and sometimes I post the pictures that I find there onto our thing as a reference. But also, you gotta if this is a launching point, other people are a great starting point if you're asking on social media. However, everybody's got an opinion, and sometimes and I'm going to discuss this with Dragonhead Studios, so we won't go into it here, but sometimes there's debates on things that are accurate or adequate or appropriate, Like the biggest thing would
Yes.
be black, biggest thing would be fur over your shoulders, so on and so forth. There's some little things that people are hotly debating. I would say as a advice, if it's hotly debated, I'd probably
Right.
try to stay away
Like
from
the
it.
questions I was asking these groups
Um,
was, hey, what kind of nasal helm would be best for a king? And I got a couple differing
mhm,
answers, but the majority said a one piece forged nasal helm because that was expensive to produce at the time, and a
yeah,
king would have had access to it. And I was like, oh, okay, thank you so much.
yeah,
But yeah, stuff like,
and
oh, go ahead.
oh, go ahead. No,
No,
you
but
first.
I was just about to agree with you. Like stuff like, oh, can I put leather pauldrons over my mail? Probably not because they didn't even have pauldrons or the idea of pauldrons at the time. So
Yeah,
you got to take everything with a grain of salt, but don't be afraid to reach out.
and of course, big note: if anybody if anybody looks like they're wearing a Halloween costume or a
They
costume
probably
from a
don't know.
TV show, then just
Right.
avoid it like the plague. Don't make a comment. Don't make a comment. I have a tendency to come across online as an a-hole when I'm
Hmm.
commenting on things like this because people don't like their kids being criticized if they're watching Vikings or
Especially
The Last
Vikings. Like
Kingdom or
goodness.
cartoons. But yeah, like I said, anything hotly debated, just stay away from it. But there's a lot of intelligent people out there who will guide you in the right place. So, on a note on the Sword of Offa, and we definitely should have mentioned it, but we're kind of limited in time. But I did want to say, in when you mentioned the Sword of Offa and how you guys are interpreting this, I could not find anything on the Sword of Offa in any way, shape, or form aside of a
Mhm.
reference to it being well, Edmund was given the Sword of Offa, bip but there's no artifact. There's no reference to evidence. I mean, for all intents and purposes, if I'm insulting someone by saying this, but it
Mhm.
feels like it didn't exist. It feels like it's like Excalibur, right? It's just some made up junk to make Edmund look cooler or like he fought Canute, and Canute was like, no, you are the greater
Right.
you are the greater person here. I will not fight you. So trying to find things on the Sort of Alpha, I actually found your post on Reddit because I tried Reddit too,
Yeah. Yeah, I
and I'm
remember I
banned
asked
on Reddit
about that.
because I'm banned on
Oh,
Reddit. I'm opinionated, but I saw your post on there, and I also went into some of the Facebook groups trying to find anything on the Sword of Alpha, and there is
mhm,
literally nothing. There's legitimately nothing. There's no books, at least off the top of my head. If you know of a book, an
mhm,
academic book, mind you, that references the Sword of Alpha, please post that down below. Because I mean, I'm not doubting that this sword existed. Obviously, it's Alpha was his grandfather or something of that nature. So any sword that's an heirloom passed down to you is going to be called, the sword of person. But I could not find the sword at all. So when you're looking for what would the sword be, it's like, well, now you gotta have this very vague, very broad search of, okay, well, what did the swords back then look like? And then you gotta be like, oh well, I'm just
yeah,
gonna go with this.
I did struggle with that. I did
So
find an article referencing Ethelstan's will. I'll do my best to find it again and send it to you because it mentioned the collection
yeah,
of arms that was given to Edmund. So yeah, I'll try to find that and send it to you. Um, but no, I did take it with a
yeah,
grain of salt. It definitely was more of like the English love to, you know, elaborate, embellish. Yes. So
embellish.
I'm sure that whatever sword Edmund was using was the sword of blank. So yeah, and it was a lot of, well,
Yeah,
what did Anglo-Saxon swords look like 200 years or 300 years before this battle? And King Offa did exist. He was a real person. Um,
and so does
exactly.
his sword. But that was my point. Like I'm like, oh, awesome. All right, so this is something that definitely would have survived being in the
Hmm.
ground for 1,000 years.
Nope.
Nope,
Yeah.
nope. Where? Nope, nope. Literally nothing. Literally nothing. Just like my discussion with Catherine on, geez,
Same.
I want to say Adelaide, but that's not it.
Yeah.
Aquitaine. Um, there's nothing because I mean, if there is, it's behind not a paywall, but but some literal private doors.
Well, Edmund's
right?
burial.
So maybe some.
Edmund's.
Well, I mean,
Good.
oh, I mean, like her legit personal
Yeah.
belongings. You know, if there's anything that survives, is behind
Yeah.
private doors. And unfortunately, if the actual Sword of Offa that Edmund used is still knocking about somewhere, that could very well be behind a private
Right.
collector's door, and nobody knows. Like a couple years ago, and there's still been nothing about it, but someone, a private collector, sold a fossil, a beautiful, very revealing fossil of the megalodon shark. You know, the very famous, ginormous shark. Uh, that's now like a
Right.
big movie thing.
In reality,
Because typically with typically with
right.
sharks, you only get teeth, and this was like a legit, like this is, you know what this is, right? And so there's a problem in obviously paleontology, but also historical archaeology and historian issues, that a lot of this ends up in the hands of private collectors. And then once it's behind closed doors, you know, maybe something that everybody on the planet is looking for. You know, Leo DiCaprio's got it in his basement, and no one's gonna ever
Right.
see it again. And so, you know, maybe some dude somewhere has a literal mummified Tyrannosaurus, or maybe has the
Yeah.
the Sword of Offa, and
No.
nobody's ever gonna know because it's in private hands. And I feel like that's a disservice to history and sense and education and whatever it is, you know, reenactment as well. So there's only so much we can do in terms of research if it's something that we legit just cannot find. But I wanted to circle that whole roundabout discussion as we close out the episode way too late than I intended. The book that I purchased and I sent over to our director. I don't know if he used it or referenced it during the show because I'm not down there. But the sword book that I found that goes, I'm tethered, so let me grab the book for a quick second. Swords of the Viking Age by Ian Pierce, which goes into an incredible depth and shows you the minutia of material, how it was forged, all the different swords that they would have made, had access to, who would have been able to buy them, what symbols you'd have found on them, meanings behind everything, who would have used it, and even able to get swords that were in private collections that had never before seen until he posted that book, published that book. So I feel like that was what I found trying to find the Sword of Offa. And those are the pictures I posted in our section of the Discord here. But I would suggest people actually buy the book. I'm not going to publicly post that. But that even that book though had nothing on the Sword of Offa. Didn't even have a reference to it. So it's just like you only have so much you can go off of. I don't know if he utilized that at all, our director, but I sent it to him at least. But yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
No, I just that's all good information, and take things with a grain of salt. Just like I talked a big game about the Sword of Offa, and then I do remember you telling me that you hadn't found anything, and I was just taking what I heard from multiple repeated sources. Oh, the Sword of Offa, the Sword of Offa, the Sword of Offa. I have since we've been talking about this, I have looked up several articles, and they have mentioned it. But I'm trying to find the will itself, and I think I'm getting close. But we don't have to talk about that right now. This has been a fantastic episode. Thank you so much for letting me come on and basically just word barf everywhere about armor and clothing and swords and just all that stuff. This is the stuff I love talking about. This is half of the reason why I do the Sarasota Medieval Fair or any kind of reenactment is the costuming, is the armor. It literally is 50% of my desire and interest to do medieval things, because I love how people looked back then. I love how they utilized clothing in different ways, how they used natural fibers and linens and and cloth and all that, and how effective armor was. Like, people assume, oh, plate armor, or even mail. A well-made mail coat with a well-made gambeson can stop a pretty powerful thrust with a spear or sword or an arrow. And people often look over that fact. And it's just so interesting delving into this stuff. So, NC, thanks once again. I know it's been a long episode, but I always enjoy coming on and talking about this stuff with you. And to those who are listening, happy Halloween. And I hope you guys are safe trick-or-treating. And we'll see you at the show.
Oh, if you're a puppy. Indeed. And that'll be that for this episode of the Talk Past podcast. Of course, we'll discuss in the future regarding FCFT and panels and all that hip rock and jazz meringue pie. I am going to leave up the information that we had already digressed previously when we were going to maybe split this into a 2-episode. So all that information is going to be down below in the comments, the description. Also, the midpoint of this will be that. I'll just take out the closeout. So you'll have that info. You can get us in all of our social medias that are already listed, already mentioned. And bip-a-bop. Thank you for again talking again. Until then, I am NC, of course, the host of the channel. And you are Caleb. You can close yourself out.
Yes, I am Caleb. I am the I guess you could say I'm the director of FCFT full contact foot tournament. Sorry, so hard to say. I have Caleb's cosplay on Instagram. You can see my stuff there. But until next time, I will see you next time.